Okay, we have a question here from Julius. Is Julius here? Yeah. No. They've all let us down, haven't they? Perhaps they just threw the question in and ran. So we have talked on some of this, but I think it would be useful to open up the debate about what proportion of UK energy do you think needs to be generated by renewable sources by 2050? And do you and your party, or you and your business, support onshore wind farms and solar arrays, for example, across the Cotswolds? As you may well know, onshore wind farms are currently more or less impossible to get going because of protest. And if somebody protests and doesn't want one, then they don't get built. So it's effectively a ban, as far as I'm aware. Let's start with Julie. Julie, what proportion of UK energy do you think needs to be generated by renewable sources by 2050? And do you and Labour support onshore wind farms and solar arrays, for example, across the Cotswolds?
Right, okay. And this is where my lack of detailed knowledge about climate change and net zero comes in. I don't know what proportion we should be aiming for by 2050, but as much as possible, I would think. We're certainly committed to net zero by 2030, and we'll be doing everything we can to invest in new technologies, both in terms of manufacturing, as in terms of stuff that we already know about, but also investing in R&D to develop new ways forward. Do we support onshore wind farms? Yes, and also offshore wind farms. I think floating wind farms is being talked about a lot. It's not a technology I'm particularly familiar with, but I know we will be looking at doing everything we can to work with renewable sources and ways of generating power. So there will be plans to improve the planning system to allow those developments to take place and to encourage as much a variety as possible to come from renewable sources. But the actual figures I can't say at the moment.
Thank you. I'll go to Tabi, if I may. Tabi, what do the Greens think about onshore wind and what percentage of onshore wind and solar farms, and what percentage of renewables do you think should come from UK energy from renewables by 2050?
I think probably a lot of people can anticipate what my response would be. Yes, of course. Sorry, I'm so bad at this. I kind of feel like a lot of you will be able to anticipate what my response to this would be. I kind of feel like 2050 is probably not soon enough, in fairness. But when you think about the subsidies that are being given to fossil fuel generation, like just the fact that still exists as a thing is quite shocking. And actually, having worked at Ecotricity, like full disclosure, from I think around 2013 to 2018, I was there standing slightly gobsmacked when Eric Pickles kind of did the whole onshore wind thing and just annihilated the entire industry overnight. That was quite... I mean, it's frustrating because you kind of really want to have resilient energy generation measures because, battery storage is a really, really big one. There are many different mechanisms of energy storage now. And it's quite exciting sort of seeing what's possible. It's not even just necessarily lithium batteries anymore. It's kind of an emerging science, which is very exciting. But I kind of feel like you kind of really want to have sort of smart local grid systems as well, so that you can have locally generated electricity to make sure that it reduces the risk of power blackouts. If we were to remove the subsidies that are often locked in, it's a really promising step, the fact that we've left the Energy Charter Treaty. That was really good news this year. It's still going to take several years to recover from that. But just the fact that fossil fuel companies were in a position to sue the governments of countries for taking climate-friendly mitigation policies, it's really bad that was even a thing. So I kind of feel as though hopefully the landscape is changing to... I understand that a lot of people are a bit frustrated about onshore wind. They kind of think it's quite unappealing, but it's always worth remembering that onshore wind farms, they only have a lifespan around 25 years before they're decommissioned. So, that's kind of in some ways the bridging fuel that they always said gas would be. Onshore wind can be a 25-year thing, and then you basically take the whole thing down and we'll have another technology that supersedes that. So it's kind of a temporary grief in some ways for anyone who's stressed out about onshore wind. It's not it's not as destructive as a lot of people say. And you can also kind of tactically plan wind farms so that they are taking into account migration patterns of birds. There's actually an onshore wind development in northern Spain where they can actually tell when birds are migrating past, so they can switch them off so the birds can navigate around them. So again, the technology is very exciting. Again, sorry talking a lot about it.
I think we're getting some feedback from the microphone on this side.
A bit slower and sorry.
A bit louder. Thank you.
Sorry, this is my hyperfixation. I get
I'll come
excited.
to Alex for this one, thank you. Alex, what's the UK government,
Sure.
what's the Conservative position on UK energy,
Yep.
which you mentioned,
Great.
and also onshore wind farms?
Sure. Well, in terms of energy production, remember, of course, we have legally binding targets, which is net zero by 2050, as you know. And that was a target, a legally binding target, which was created in Cheltenham. So it started from a conversation with young people at Bourneside School. It then became a private member's bill, which I took into Parliament, and then in the Theresa May government, that became the law of the land. So that is the reason why we have net zero, is because of Cheltenham. So that's just something to be aware of. So specifically, as I look at the grid at the moment, we're producing around about 29 gigawatts of energy. That's what's running us. So in terms of our targets, we've got already installed offshore, by the way, more offshore wind generation capability than any other nation on the planet apart from China. We already have installed about 28 gigawatts worth, so if that was all running full tilt, it would be powering us entirely now. But the aim is to get to 50 gigawatts by 2030. Why is that important? Because you need to have additional power so that you can do green hydrogen. So if you want to extract hydrogen, which as you all know from your electrolysis, lots of clever people in this room, you need loads and loads of power to do so. So wind, 50 gigawatts by
Alex,
2030.
could you just tell us what 20 gigawatts is in percentage terms?
Well, 20 gigawatts of 50 is 40% of that.
I mean, yeah, we're looking at what's the percentage.
So the total amount we're using for the entirety of the United Kingdom at the moment is 28 gigawatts. So that's what we're using. So we're looking at, for offshore wind alone, the thick end of double that capacity simply on offshore wind. So that's the plan. So it's close to double, a bit over 90%. So that's the first one. Nuclear, we think, should be part of the mix. At the moment, it's producing about 5 gigawatts. We think it should be 24 gigawatts by 2050. Yes, it's very expensive, but France did it. France, I think, was right to do it. Bluntly, they have really significant baseload capacity, which I think we should have done with the benefit of hindsight. We're turning that around. And then,
tell people what
sure.
that means in terms of percentage, because I don't know that people would really understand what
So
we're talking about in gigawatts.
A gigawatt. So there's a
Percentage of UK usage.
right. Well, the UK usage at the moment is about 28 gigawatts. As I was saying, we range between 20 and 40. So when everyone goes to sleep at night, about 4 o'clock in the morning, we'll be using about 20 gigawatts. When everyone gets up in the morning and they switch on their kettle, about 9 o'clock, we'll get up to, particularly if it's a cold day, we'll get to about 39, 40 gigawatts, something like that. So that's broadly it. And so where we want to get to with nuclear is 24 gigawatts, around about, a little over half that. And then also solar. So we have installed about 8 gigawatts at the moment. We want to get that up to 5 times that, so 40 gigawatts by 2035. And the reason why we want more than we need is because you have to have that in order to do some of the incredibly energy-intensive stuff. If you want to build a wind turbine, you've got to create steel. If you want to run arc furnaces, you need a lot of power. You can't, it just doesn't magic it up. If you want to create green hydrogen rather than blue hydrogen, which is defeating the objects, is all through methane, if you want to do it with electricity, you need a massive surfeit of power. That's why we've got to build it. And here's the final point. We will only be able to do that if we have a growing economy. And to that first point, is we have to generate the individual tax revenues so that allows us to innovate in that way. And it's only by doing that that we'll get where we need to go. Thank you.
Thank you. And to you, Max.
Thank you. I'll keep it brief because I think most of the key points have already been made. The Liberal Democrat position is that by 2030 we would have the UK generating 80% of our power from renewable sources and next to nothing by the time you get to 2050. The Lib Dem policy is for a target sooner than 2050 for net zero. My view is that you need to set more stretching targets, otherwise you definitely don't get there because, let's face it, the country mostly misses most of its targets most of the time. The nuclear power was at 17% in 2018, but is projected probably to fall. The ambitions for it to increase, I think, are probably going to be the right thing. We don't all like nuclear power, but it is possibly the least of all the worst options in the scenarios that you look at as you go to the future and you look at whether you're keeping the lights on using coal or gas or nuclear. The waste is going to be there and we will have to deal with that. But nuclear will be there as part of the transition as we go to the forms of power that have been mentioned in the question. And I think we all need to be very much more relaxed about onshore wind power. I think the government took the wrong decision when they decided effectively to ban onshore wind, and that needs to be overturned as soon as possible, and the Liberal Democrats would do that. And in terms of solar arrays, well, they're not always the most attractive things. It's already happening. If you go around the country, you will see them in the countryside all over the place, and in the Cotswolds, there are already solar arrays in various parts of it, not necessarily in Cotswolds district, but the wider region that you would call the Cotswolds. So it's already happening, and we are putting up with that quite nicely. We'll need to put up with an awful lot more.
Thank you. And Ian, any comments?
Well, I think it's very simple from my point of view. I mean, I'm agreeing very strongly with most of what Alex and Max have said, which is, we need to have 100% zero carbon energy by a lot sooner than 2050, 2035 at the latest, I would say. I suspect you're right that nuclear, unfortunately, has to be a part of that. As much of it should be renewable as possible, but we have to be realistic too. I just would like to say something to all of the parliamentary candidates on the subject of net zero. We've led the world in having a net zero target. It's fantastic, but we need to lead the world again, because our net zero target at the moment doesn't actually cover all of the emissions generated by the people living in this country, because it doesn't include the emissions associated with all the products that we import, which is around about 40%. I'm not knocking what we've done so far. It's absolute leadership, but we need to keep going and show that further leadership.
Thank you.
Is Ian going to tell us about scope 3 measurements and what your business can do to help?
No, I'm not.
Oh.
I'm not here to do that, but no.
Well, I'm sure he can help you out. We've spoken about it.